everyone and welcome back to Mariana Mas Books. My name is Mariana and today I am here with what I'm calling a reading tastes audit. A while ago I saw some videos that some people did about a 5-star audit in which they would take their books that they have given 5 stars to and analyze them to see what things they had in common, what things they like, to kind of audit what makes for them a 5-star book, because that's the kind of nerdy thing that we like here in booktube. I am taking that idea, but instead of doing the 5-star books, because I am not a stingy 5-star giver. I give 5 stars. If I love a book, I give it 5 stars. So I don't think that a 5-star audit would be super informative. What I want to do today is doing a fantasy edition of my reading tastes. So I'm going to talk about some fantasy fiction that has been formative and analyze them, see what I liked about them, what it is that had such an impact on me. I hope it makes sense. It's kind of off the cuff. I'm going to be talking about these things fairly chronologically. So the first books that I want to talk about are The Witches and the Charlie and the Chocolate Factory by Roald Dahl. Those I read when I was in 2nd grade, and they were incredibly informative simply because Roald Dahl was my first favorite author. I felt very grown up when I was in 2nd grade saying that I had a favorite author, and that favorite author was Roald Dahl. Those two are the first that I read, and they were the most impactful and my favorites, and the ones that I still remember. However, for this particular video, The Witches is the one that is really important, because Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, its importance for me, or its impact for me, or the reason why I hold it with as such a dear book to me, is because I read it in a single day. And again, for me, in 2nd grade, I felt very adult. But The Witches is the one that really impacted me in terms of my reading tastes, in terms of finding something that blew my mind. If you don't know, The Witches is the story about a boy who goes on vacation with his grandma to a hotel. A group of witches is also staying in that hotel. But there are sections of the book where the grandmother explains to the grandkids about witches. She explains that there are witches out in the world and that you can recognize them, and she goes on and gives him a list of things that he can look out for to identify witches. So like they wear gloves and other things. The gloves are the thing that I most remember. That idea of magic existing in the real world just spoke directly to me. And it's funny because it's different than a portal fantasy, right? Because portal fantasy, you have magic can be found in the world, but it's not that this world has magic. It's that there is a magic portal in this world that transports you to another world where there is magic. I am not talking about that. I am talking about magic and magic creatures that coexist with us in our world. So it is funny, but I actually credit The Witches to the origins of me loving urban fantasy. And I mean, I don't know if we could classify The Witches as an urban fantasy as such, but it is this idea of a modern day urban setting where you have magical creatures, right? So I do credit The Witches to being my initiation into urban fantasy, and I just loved that concept of knowing that in the world there is magic. What I'm also going to say is that it combines two things. So one thing is the witches being part of the world, but the other thing is I'm going to say like the nerdy academic study of how magic exists in the world, which is not to say a magic system, is not how magic works. The grandmother teaches the boy how to recognize the witches. So it's kind of akin to these types of books that you find for kids, where you will find Anatomy of a Fairy, that type of thing, I've always been super nerd. I love school, I love classes, I love learning stuff. And so that format of having a research into magical beings really appeals to me. So that is the first one, that is the witches. If I go in chronological order, I would then have to talk about the Lord of the Rings. And I'm going to try not to stay too much here in this book, because I talk about it all the time here, and I don't want to bore you guys, okay? So, The Lord of the Rings. That is the formative work in my life. I have said this before. The Lord of the Rings is more than a book to me. It is my life. It is my identity. In terms of my reading tastes in fantasy, it is medieval fantasy, right? Like The Lord of the Rings planted the seed of my love for medieval fantasy. You know, the traditional setting where you have kings and kingdoms, and you get what I'm saying. You see this puzzle that I have hanging there with the lady with like the long dress, like this is my personality, and it all comes from The Lord of the Rings. But it also impacted me in my reading tastes beyond fantasy, and not only reading, just in my interests in general. I've talked about this. My love of history directly comes from The Lord of the Rings. Oh, wait, no, yes, I do want to say one more thing about it, and that is that Tolkien also does this academic type of study of something. He writes The Lord of the Rings as if it was history. And when I was 11 reading these books, this blew my mind. The idea that this actually happened. I kid you not, I have always said all my life, I have always said that I look forward to the day that a group of archaeologists uncover the ruins of Minas Tirith. I have always said it since I was 11. I just love that type of writing, that type that emulates like an academic piece of work. The idea that this was history. So already you see a line connect these two works where it's not the same thing, because the witches is in the current world, there is magic and there is this thing that exists, and the Lord of the Rings is there was this, I'm going to say magic in the olden days. I mean, if you have read Tolkien's biography, or you have read about Tolkien, you know that what he wanted to create was like a mythology for England. And that is something that connects this idea of this in the world, there is magic, and this academic scholarly tone, where Roald Dahl doesn't have that tone. But to me, as a second grader, that list of ways you can identify a witch, that felt very academic and scholarly to me. So I am going to say that they are related. So after that, I am actually going to talk about a picture book. It's a picture book that I loved, and it was my favorite, and I had it until I was probably until high school, and then I gave it away, and then I regretted giving it away. Like now as an adult, I regret giving that book away, and I wish that I had it, because Why did I give it away? This book is actually a picture book in Spanish, and I'm going to say the title in Spanish and then I'm going to give you the rough translation. So the title in Spanish is El Manual de los Monstruos Caseros, which means the manual to house monsters, something along those lines. And it's basically like a bestiary format where you have the monster and the explanation. House monsters refers to these creatures that live in your house that do mischievous things. It's that concept, but they are monsters. The one that I always remember is the El Doctor Aquilopuse. The names of the monsters are play on words. His name is the this is where I left it monster, and he's a monster that steals things. So I don't know, like one of your socks or your keys or the remote. To this day, whenever I can't find something, I say, oh, Dr. Aquilopus stole it. To this day, I still refer to Dr. Aquilopuse. That's the idea of that picture book. And the reason why I am bringing it up is because it is the same thing. It is creatures, magical creatures in the real world, but depicted through a academic type writing. So we are discovering that I am a nerd who loves magic. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk. I actually have had several books like those. I currently have one on my bookshelf that I'm not going to get because I'm going to ruin my setup. It is called In the Land of Stone Flowers, and that's like a reverse magical study book, because that one is supposed to be an encyclopedia written by fairies about human beings. And so it is the study of human beings, and you have at the beginning of the book the authors, the gnome that authored the book. So it's that idea of the academic study of in a magical context. And then after the house monster manual, I'm going to talk about actually a TV show, and that is Charmed. Charmed was my life. I loved it. If Twitter had existed when I was growing up and I was a Charmed fan, I would have been a part of the Charmed fandom. So, Charmed, urban fantasy. I don't remember who I was talking to online, who I told this to, and they were like, oh, I never considered Charmed urban fantasy, and why not? You know this very popular series that I want to read, the Dresden Files, where you have a guy who is a wizard in the middle of Chicago, I think, and he defeats demons in Chicago. These are a group of 3 witches that defeat demons in San Francisco. Anyway, this is urban fantasy, and this was what cemented my love of urban fantasy as it is. I just call urban fantasy when you have the current world with magic in it. That's urban fantasy for me. If there are monsters with cell phones, urban fantasy. Okay? Yeah, perfect. So we're on the same page. And it's also this idea of the I didn't know I had magic until a certain age trope. This idea of, oh, we are just regular women living in the world, and then one day we discover that we are actually super powerful witches and we have the power of 3. The power of 3 was my life.
Power of 3.
Kind of in the veins of, Sabrina the Teenage Witch. She turns 16 and she's told that she's a witch, and she discovers this whole world that there is magic. Or even the fantasy fiction that no one likes to talk about anymore in booktube, but that we have to talk about if we're talking about formative fiction, which is Harry Potter. Harry is just this boy living his miserable life until when he turns 11 he receives this letter and it's "You're a wizard, Harry," that concept. In one of my recent videos about Jennifer Brooks, I mentioned how she said that she hated the monsters with cell phone trope and how much I love that trope. I just love it. This idea of these three witch sisters living in San Francisco, living a normal life, but also they have the Book of Shadows in the attic, and there are demons, and they do magic, and they freeze things. Piper was my favorite. Piper was my queen. I would go like, I love her.
Piper, come on. I'm gonna go to the club.
Gavin he used to be called How to Train Your Gavin, but it's now Gavin Reads It All. He did a vlog where he read the Charmed books and he interspersed like scenes and music, and it was so good. I'm going to link it down below because oh my god, my nostalgia was through the roof. And then the final thing that I'm going to talk about is, of course, Twilight. I can't not talk about Twilight. I think that was my introduction to fandoms, fan fiction. I was obsessed with Twilight, and seeing the connection of all of the things that I have mentioned. Twilight is a normal, magicless 16-year-old. By the way, I read the first book when I was 16, so perfect age. She's just like a regular 16-year-old who goes to a high school and then, oh whoa, vampires. That idea of suddenly encountering a parallel world that coexists with yours. And this one has the added element of the romance, which is another thing that I love. I love romance books. I love romance in books. Oh, also, this adds another element, which is another thing that I really like, which is the explanation of the magical beings, their world, their rules, how it works. I love reading explanations of worlds, and I feel like that's the parallel that comes straight from the witches, where you just have the grandma telling a list of this is how you recognize witches, going back to Middle Earth, the different cultures, there's a history for each of the different cultures, each of the different, factions. Whatever it is that you are reading, the explanation of the culture is something that I love. So what have we learned? I love magic in the real world. I love nerdy, scholarly, academic type writing. It's funny because I feel like most of the things that I've talked about point to that more like contemporary urban type setting, but most of what I read and most of what I'm drawn to are medieval fantasy books, traditional medieval fantasy books, and that goes to show you how formative a single piece of work can be. You have this single one thing, The Lord of the Rings, that was the one that had the most impact for me, and that just pulls everything into that direction. Medieval vibes, that thing. So we have urban fantasy, different cultures explained, regular people immersed in a magical world, and the other thing is medieval vibes. That's what we have learned. It has been 44 minutes of me talking to come to a very simple conclusion. Was this video worth it? I don't know. For me it was fun. I hope it was fun for you. Okay, so as you heard, the original video when I filmed it was 44 minutes long. And that is because for each of the things that I talked about, I attempted to give an example of a current either series or book that I love. And while I think that was interesting and it was the original concept of the video to parallel the formative works to what I'm currently reading based on the analysis, I realized that for a video like this it would have been better to do a script. So instead I just took out all of the current stuff and left the formative stuff so it would make a bit more sense. And maybe I will do a second part of the video, emphasis on the word maybe, where I will give you the current stuff that I loved based on the formative work that I talked about in this video. Yes, hopefully it makes sense. And also, if anyone has recommendations based on what I talked about in this video, I would love to hear about them in the comments. I will leave it at that. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you soon with another bookish video. And in the meantime, I wish you happy reading.